Good evening, and thanks so much for your time. Really glad that this is happening. Last week was a doozy. I want to touch on a couple of the things that I heard this evening. The first thing I'd actually like to do is take a moment of silence for Ahmaud Arbery, who was murdered in cold blood this week. Because if we're going to talk about how we got to where we are and all the structural inequity that is being amplified by COVID-19, the conversation starts with an anti-racist analysis, right? And that is what's going to guide a human conversation around everything from resources to grades. So I wanted to start and just make that real for folks because we all live in our bubbles the same way that in school communities we're all siloed. And sometimes you really only know what's going on in your school. So communities of color are dealing with things like that. And so when these students are getting on here and they're talking about being criminalized and dehumanized when they walk into school, you have to relate that to the real world and the things that are happening in real life. People's lives being lost, not only to this pandemic, but also to the virus of racism, right? And that is now affecting communities across the board of color. And what we're not going to solve that with is this continued investment in a system that categorizes us based on being better than each other. So when I hear about grades, and I know that the rhetoric was formulated to seem equitable, but I also know what it looks like. I am a Black girl that went to and graduated from a specialized high school. I passed the Shazat. I did all the cool things. That did not stop me from being dehumanized, tokenized, and criminalized, folks. So when we're having these conversations and we're trying to prop up the people of color who make it into these institutions as though it works for everyone, because look at them, we really need to have a more in-depth conversation and start asking those kids what it looks like to be in those spaces. Because equitable education should never mean that we have 20 seats and everyone else, oh well. It also shouldn't mean that, well, if you're under an 85, your grades don't matter. I heard something great about improvement and about, celebrating going from a 70 to an 80. And that's wonderful. But it doesn't change the fact that some of our parents are so unable to put themselves in someone else's shoes that in a global pandemic, we are fighting for grades when kids don't have food, don't have clothing, don't have housing, don't have devices, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I keep hearing that we shouldn't use the pandemic to change things, but we didn't use anything before the pandemic. And I'm wondering why that's such a bad idea, if I'm being honest with you all. I also heard someone else said something about metal detectors. I'm just kind of looking at my notes because I took notes. If we could hear all those students from the Yaya Network speak in great detail about how dehumanized they felt and still believe that that is the best option for our children, then we have a long way to go. The whole point of something like this should be centering the voices of students, parents, and teachers. But that has to be done with best practices, right? Because some of us do not know what's best for everyone. We're fighting very specifically for ourselves. And I hope that in a time like this, we're all trying to be more communal, more humanity facing, right? And really looking at the folks who have less and have had less historically, systemically, and structurally, and working on ways that we can come together to fix those things rather than advocating for ourselves and only our communities and our children. So I just want to show some love to our IEP parents, our multilingual learners, our Black and Brown students, our low-income students, our queer students, and everyone else who has been getting the short end of the stick for this entire time. And I really hope that we take it upon ourselves as individuals and as collectives to change things. This is the time. It's been the time. Thank you, guys.
Yes, Tajh.